Okay, hello, and welcome to my session. Today we're going to be taking a guided tour through the best of Drupal 8 in 2018. This session is based off of a long-running blog series I've authored over at Mediacurrent.com. And my goal today is to share with you modules that our team uses every day on a multitude of projects. Okay, let's take a look at today's agenda. After a short intro, we'll set the table by asking the question, how many modules do I actually need on a given project? Then we'll look at the essentials list for 2018. I'll go through each module briefly to give you a feel for what it does and how you would go about installing and configuring each module. Then after that, we're going to go through a list of honorable mentions. These modules are not necessarily essential on every project, but are still worthy of consideration. And then we'll wrap up with Q&A. So let's get started. First, a bit about Mediacurrent, my employer. So Mediacurrent is a full-service digital agency that implements world-class open-source software, development, strategy, and design to achieve defined goals for enterprise organizations seeking a better return on investment. It's a mouthful. Now a little bit about me. I've been working with Drupal for a long time, as far back as Drupal 4.6. I've enjoyed putting together this top modules list for many years, and so I figured it was time to present the list in person. And this format allows me to spend a little bit more time going through each recommendation. Before we get started, I'd like to help answer the critical question for people who are new to Drupal and might be asking, how many modules do I actually need? Newcomers to Drupal often want to download and install a bunch of modules. I would definitely encourage newbies to play around with modules. That being said, you should understand that every module you add is like a plant that you have to water, or a new puppy you have to keep from messing on the carpet. The utility or the use of that module needs to exceed the effort to maintain that module. Otherwise, you're just going to create a long-term maintenance problem for yourself. Okay, now onto the list. First, we're going to go through what I might characterize as the essentials list. These modules are ones we use on most projects. One thing I should note in today's presentation is that I'm assuming that most of you have used Drupal and know how to do some basic site building tasks and various types of configuration. Things like adding a field to a content type, that sort of stuff. Okay, and here it is. I should mention the obvious that there are literally thousands of modules out there. They can be hard to sort through. That being said, there are some projects that rise above others. This list is subjective, for sure, but it's based on real project usage and over 10 years of Drupal experience. Okay, so let's go through the list one by one. Okay, another thing I should note is that we're not going to spend a lot of time on each module. My goal is to give you just enough information to understand what the module does and why you might like to use it. Some modules are pretty easy to understand. Others require more explanation. I'm also purposely not trying to include modules that are very complex to use or install. Most of the modules that you see can be installed and configured even if you're a beginner. If you have questions, you can raise your hand as we go, or you can wait till the end, and that's up to you. I would only ask that we try not to spend too much time on any one module because I'd like to get through the whole list. Okay, the first one is an easy one. This is called the Admin Toolbar. It's a module that you might think would just be in core. We use this on every project because navigating through menus in Drupal is a real pain without rollover menus. And this module is easy to install. You pretty much just enable it and you're done. if you can see that. Okay. All right, so I mentioned a second ago that most of the modules I've selected are for beginners. This module is actually more of an intermediate module, but if you do plan on doing any custom theming at all, at some point you're going to want to use this module. It essentially makes it easy for you to namespace your theme name to make including twig files easier. Like I said, this is more of an intermediate module, but if you do custom theming, you're going to want to have it. Develop, a very handy module for developers. This also might be more of an intermediate module, but it can help you debug problems in twig templates, for example. Another good feature, even for beginners, is the ability to generate dummy content. And that's very helpful for testing. Here we're going to take a look at the Media Entity Browser module. This module depends on the Entity Browser and Media Entity Image modules. The Media Entity Browser module is nice because it gives you the ability to have a nice little library pop-up to upload, browse, search for different types of media. The process of installing the modules and its dependencies is pretty easy, so you have to enable a few modules. To actually use this feature, it does require a couple of extra steps. So when you add a field, you're going to want to use an entity reference. And then you'll configure whatever media bundles that you want to use with that. And then the last thing to actually make the library pop up for you on the form, on the editing form, you're going to need to configure it under the form display. So on your content type, you've got manage display, manage form display. Under the form display is where you're going to need to go change the formatter to use the Media Entity Browser. So if all of that is confusing to you, I would suggest that you take a look at the Lightning or Thunder install profiles. Those are easy to install, and they have this set up for you. And we'll talk more about Lightning later on. All right, let's talk about a nice little module called Field Group. This module lets you group your fields together, but in a more organized way. You create these groups on the Manage Form Display tab that we just talked about. And you'll have several options for organizing fields, including accordions, tabs, things like that. And this will make things much easier for your content administrators. So there's an example. Okay, Google Analytics module. This is easy to install. You pretty much just need to have your UA ID, and then you're good. As soon as you plug that in, the basic tracking is going to work. There's a lot of advanced options, but most people start with just the basic tracking. The Link It module. This handy little guy gives you an autocomplete pop-up inside of WYSIWYG. And so it's much easier to use this little pop-up to add links rather than having to hunt around for the path yourself. My fellow co-worker, Damien McKenna, has worked on the meta tag module for many years, along with many others in the community. This module lets you configure all of your meta tags for SEO. All you do is add the meta tag field to any content type where you want to have the ability to add and update meta tags. And typically you're going to want to do that for all of your content types. Panels. This has been around for many years. This is a great site building tool. You can create custom layouts. You can do drag and drop interface. At Mediacurrent, we used to use this more than we do now. We use it some. There definitely is a big effort, I would say, in Drupal core to port more panel stuff over to core. So it's definitely something you should look at and play around with and see if it's good for you, because more and more of it I think is going to be in core soon. We tend to like the paragraphs approach at Mediacurrent, so we'll talk about that next. So paragraphs, this is maybe my favorite module. Paragraphs creates a new entity type. So think of it like a mini content type. There are many use cases, but one trend that's gained steam across the community is replacing the ubiquitous body field on a content type with a paragraphs field. So instead of making this body WYSIWYG field the centerpiece of your page, you can have a supercharged paragraph field that gives you all kinds of structured content. Editors love it because they can build robust pages. Developers love it because it's structured. We have a bunch of paragraph types that we might reuse on multiple projects. So say we want to drop in a testimonial or a quote, we'll have a paragraph that captures the quote and an author. Then maybe we'll want to drop in an FAQ. So we'll have a paragraph type for that. The possibilities are really endless. Paragraphs can pretty much do whatever you want them to. You can mix and match to your heart's content. You can reorder things on the page very easily. What I like about this in comparison to panels is that you're not having to train content admins on a new interface. And so they can still do all of their work on the content editing screens. So I like that. Path Auto is a module you're going to want to have. This lets you set up clean alias patterns for all of your content. If you want all of your blogs to have the path /blog/title with dashes instead of spaces, this will be the module that you use. It's very simple to set up, and it saves you time from having to manually add all these paths to all of your content. I also paired this with the token module. This gives you a bunch of variables that you can use in different contexts. It's really good with Path Auto. So like I mentioned, you can put the title in there. You can put the field values in there. It gives you the variables you need for that kind of stuff. Token module. That's good. Okay, redirect module. We use this on every project. If you have to add 301 redirects, you're going to want to use this module. What's nice is that this will also create 301 redirects if you update your path alias so that you don't accidentally 404 your own site visitors. And there's some other handy configurations in here that previously only existed in the global redirect module in Drupal 7. Lots of stuff in there. Okay. This is another one of my favorites, Search API. Most people come to realize pretty quickly that Drupal core search, that module is pretty terrible. The Search API module is infinitely more powerful and flexible. You can use a database index, and you can swap it out later for a Solr-based index. And you won't break your site because Search API abstracts things out pretty well. I really like the Search API Pages module. It makes it simple to create a search page. So overall, there is a little bit of a learning curve with this, but in my view, it's worth the effort because what you're going to get is infinitely better than what you get with the core search. Who likes managing sitemap.xml? Probably nobody. But you need sitemap.xml for Google to know how to index your site. This module is pretty great because you can pretty much enable it and forget it. You do have some pretty straightforward configuration if you do need extra controls. Okay, let's look at another nice little developer module. One of the annoying things when you're working on your site is that all of your images are broken when you test locally unless you want to keep copying over all of your source images to your local machine. The stage file proxy module allows you to just grab the images that you need when you need them. It's very simple to configure. You enable it, you add a couple lines to your settings.php, and then your images aren't broken anymore. When you are testing your site locally, it'll just download them when it needs them. I love it. Finally, we should not forget the web form module. This module is awesome because it makes it easy to add any kinds of forms to your website. You have all of these widgets and configuration at your disposal. This is a must-have module if you plan on managing forms within Drupal.
How about Instant Form instead?
I think I've used Entity Form a little bit, but I guess I prefer Web Form because I've used Web Form for many years in previous versions, and this one for Drupal 8 it had kind of a slow start because Quick Sketch, the module maintainer, wasn't like big on Drupal 8, but eventually, first we had YAML. What's the YAML one called? YAML Form or something. And then that got merged back into Web Form. Now Web Form's pretty solid. I don't have a big of opinion on Entity Form. I like using Web Form. It's similar to the Web Form module that I've experienced in previous versions, so that's the module I've gone with. Drupal core actually has a pretty good form module. I mean, you're talking about a contrib Entity Form. Yeah. There's a core forms module. It's called the contact module. And it's actually not bad for just creating simple forms, but very quickly you kind of, run out of things that you can do. Web form is much more powerful. You can export forms and all that stuff. Entity form might be fine too, but I'm just kind of used to web form. It's a very popular project, been used and supported for a long time, so that's what I've gone with. Okay, let's move on to another list. This one might be more fun because it's a little bit less likely that you've heard of every one of these modules. They didn't make the essentials list, but there's still some goodies in here. And here's the list. I included the Lightning install profile project, which of course is not a module. It's a collection of modules. And it includes many of the ones that we're talking about today. And so we'll talk more about that guy here in a minute. And I'm going to try to share out these slides later on. I meant to do that before, but I'll share them out after the presentation in case you want to flip through this yourself. I don't want you to lose track of it. Okay. First, CK Editor Media Embed. So, as you're probably aware, there's lots of content out there on the web that includes these little social media callouts. So, things like a Twitter quote or a YouTube embedded video. This module makes it a lot easier to include that content inside of WYSIWYG. You'll need to configure one of the Embed services that you see on the project page for this. It's actually pretty easy. So there's a couple steps, but they're easy configuration steps. They will default to one of these services that's free. Anyways, what it does is it lets you just paste in like a link to a Twitter post or Facebook post or something like that, and then it's going to get the appropriate script to render out on the page. And so that's more secure, it's easier, it's pretty cool.
Does this depend on the media module?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't have any. I don't think it has any module dependencies. All it's doing is calling like an API from one of these services and passing the URL, getting back some information on what to render, and that's pretty much it. All right, let's talk about Lightbox. Lots of sites use Lightbox plugins for media content and other things. Colorbox is a popular library, and of course there's a Drupal module by the same name that integrates said library. For beginners, this is perfect. Sometimes I know Mediacurrent, we don't always use it because clients want like hyper custom styled Lightboxes, but if that's not the case, if you need something simple, this makes it really easy. I should mention that you will have to download the Colorbox library to your libraries folder, so that is an extra installation step, but it's still pretty easy to configure. All right, what about e-commerce? If you've done any e-commerce, you probably heard about the Commerce suite of modules for Drupal. This allows you to add products to your site and checkouts and payment options and all that. It is a lot of configuration, but not like super hard configuration, so it's some work. Learning curve is not too bad. This module is called DropZone.js. I like this module for drag and drop file uploads. Pretty much everywhere you go on the web, you've got the option to just drag your file over to the little screen, and it grabs it and you can upload it. It's all easy. So you can have this on your Drupal project. And then I should mention that there is the extra step again where you have, just like with Colorbox, there's an extra library. It's called the DropZone.js library. You have to put that in the right place for it to work, but otherwise not too bad to configure.
Is that more specific for users of the site or the content managers of the site?
It could be either.
Okay.
I usually have it enabled for the content admins. We tend to not expose too much to like public visitors or users if we can stand it. So I'm usually enabling it for editor types, but I mean, could be for either if you allow file uploads, which I'm always nervous about. All right, let's talk about Entity Embed. This module lets you embed any Drupal entity anywhere, and there's about 1 million things you can do with it. Now, the most common use case is to use it to embed media within WYSIWYG. If you remember earlier, we talked about the Media Entity Browser module. This module pairs nicely with that one because you can launch that same nice library pop-up from within the WYSIWYG. The caveat is that this module is more of a pain to configure. So I actually learned how to configure this module by first installing the Lightning install profile and examining how they configured it. All right, now on to a simpler module, the external links module. Pretty much every project I work on, the client asks, hey, can we make external links open up in a new window? So you can say, yes, you can. All you do is enable this module. You've got like one checkbox in configuration and you're pretty much done. There's, of course, some other options, but that's a pretty common use case. Focal point. This is a fun module. So the problem we're trying to solve here is that supporting different kinds of crops is hard from the same source image. This solution is probably the easiest I've found for both the developer and the actual content editor. So, like, for example, one issue you'll see is that a lot of portrait images never really crop the way you want them to. And that's because a lot of times the way you have it configured initially is that it basically just crops from the center. A lot of times with portrait images, the focus is not in the center, it's somewhere else. It's up high, it's up low, or it's down low. So this will let you let the editor just specify where they want the focal point to be. And then the image styles are going to know where the focus is so they can crop around the focus instead of just cropping around maybe just the center, something like that. Now, the extra work that you're going to have to do if you enable this is that you have to configure all of your image styles to use a special kind of crop. It'll just say something like focal point crop or focal point scale and crop. And you'll have to use that, otherwise it's going to ignore what you've, it's going to ignore your focal point if you don't do that. But it's not too bad. So that's a really nice solution. There's other ways of accomplishing something similar to this, but like I said, this to me is like the easiest solution, so I really like it. Okay, geolocation. There are a lot of configuration options for this, but I like it that it just makes it simple to add a marker on a map and then have that map render in a field somewhere. It's easy to input and it's easy to format and display. And plus, of course, you have tons of configuration. Okay, do you ever get spam? Well, there's lots of options for anti-spam measures. One of them, certainly that's popular, is the use of CAPTCHAs. What I like about Honeypot, though, is that it doesn't add any extra burden on the user. It's got a couple nice little tricks, algorithms, or whatever to try to filter out spam. Sometimes I found that just using this module will kill your spam, but sometimes you're going to use it, paired with some other solution. But it's easy, and I have had it solve my spam issues before.
Is that only used when you use web form?
I mean, Honeypot will work on any kind of form.
Okay.
It's nice. You have some configuration where you can specify which forms you want it on, or you can have it like globally on a bunch of forms. Okay, let's talk about the Lightning install profile. This was created by Acquia. Now, I should say that install profiles, or they're often called distributions, in general, they're good to play around with. These will pre-configure a lot of stuff for you. What's nice about Lightning is that it's more of a general purpose type of distribution. They focus a lot on the editing experience. The media management stuff is really good. And it's got panels integration. It's got a bunch of bells and whistles. I think it's a solid tool. It's also a good teaching tool. I've used it before to learn how to use some modules kind of in reverse. And so what I mean by that is seeing a module that's already working in action, and then you examine it, look around, and look at the configuration, and then you learn how to configure that yourself. That's easier sometimes than doing the opposite of downloading it, moving it around, trying to fumble around with the configuration. You're like, I don't know what this does. This is really good way to learn a lot of the different modules that I've shown today, especially the media stuff. All right, now for another pretty simple but effective module. The scheduler module lets you schedule the publishing and unpublishing of your content. Note that it's going to use cron to make this happen, so you're going to want to make sure that your cron is running like it's supposed to, that it's configured right.
On that last one, did you add a 301 redirect after the page is unpublished?
I think you would want
Just so it doesn't 404. Well, I mean, can you set it up automatically, or do you have to do that manually once the page is?
I'd be surprised if that's in there. I actually don't know.
Okay.
No, it's not part of the module.
Okay, that's kind of annoying. Yeah, there's a couple issues with scheduler in general, that it's not integrated with everything. There is an effort to integrate it well with the content moderation stuff. There's a couple of gotchas with that if you have content moderation. But there's like a patch that's pretty far along that makes it play more nicely with workflow moderation, because the issue is like you have drafts, and the drafts get in review, so it's this whole moderation stuff, and like the scheduler know about all that and how to figure that stuff out. So that is a caveat with scheduler, but it's still pretty nice. And like you're saying, 301s you still got to figure out yourself. For me, I usually see it more with the publishing side and not the unpublishing, but there are lots of use cases where you also want to have content unpublished. Just more often than not, it's published and it's just kind of published indefinitely. So I don't run into that as much myself. All right, the slick module is pretty slick. This module has a lot of other related projects, and it lets you do things like slideshows and carousels. Again, you're going to need to download a library or two and put it in the right place for this to work. But once you figure that stuff out, you're going to have all kinds of good integrations. It gives you nice little field formatters. It integrates with media, it integrates with views, it integrates with paragraphs. It's got lots of good stuff in there. Now this project, it's called the Taxonomy Access Fix, I think. Yeah. This might get merged into Core at some point. So one problem with Core is that it doesn't give you enough granular permissions for taxonomy. So what happens is that you have to give an editor role too much permission to give them what they need to do. And to illustrate what can happen is that we had a client accidentally delete a vocabulary once because I had to give them administer vocabulary permissions. I didn't think they were going to delete one. And so that meant all of the term and node associations all got blown away. And then the site's erroring out because this vocabulary that it's expecting to be there isn't there. And so we had to restore from backup. And that wasn't fun.
That was the test. Does it work?
That was not fun. You know, with Drupal 8, you can restore the configuration real easily. You can say, okay, let's just revert to our configuration. But that doesn't help you when all those associations get erased. Okay, so this module solves that problem by giving you some extra permissions for like adding and deleting terms and things like that, so you don't have to give them too much permission, like being able to delete a vocabulary. We're back. Okay, last but not least, this might be my new favorite module. It's new to me, but it's been around for a while. My philosophy, just in general, is to try to make as many of the site pages nodes as possible. This makes those pages searchable, easy to translate. You have revisions, all that good stuff. So what we have, we talked about paragraphs. We have a paragraph type that just lets you reference a view using this field. That's all it does. And so just doing that means that you can embed any block view on any page because we have that same paragraphs field on every content type. And the practical consequence of this is that pages in the past that might have been just a views page, they're now a view block referenced by this field, and then those pages are much more flexible. They're not a pain to update because there's not like hard-coded text that's in views configuration buried somewhere or in a block, something like that. So we can have, we have the embedded view, we maybe have just some copy, in a node field or paragraph field above, below, around, whatever. It's very flexible. And it's also good for some clients who want a little bit more site building permissions. Like you could let them be able to create views, blocks, and associate them without like worrying too much that they're going to destroy everything, break a bunch of stuff. So this is good for that. I really like that module. Okay, and we're done. We've got time for Q&A. So let's open up the floor. Do we have questions? Any of this stuff? Did you find any modules that you're going to want to try out? I hope so. We went through a bunch of them.
So, excluding the obvious D8 modules, are a lot of these also available on D7?
A lot of them are.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of them are actually on D7. Not all of them.
Paragraphs is not, right?
Oh, no, it is in D7.
Okay.
The thing with paragraphs that I think got a lot of adoption is that in D7, field collection module, which is similar did some good stuff. A lot of us use that for aggregating fields together. It's not as flexible as paragraphs, but field collection is very slow to get anything working in Drupal 8. Then paragraphs was like available immediately. Like we had some early D8 projects, and it's like, well, I have to have something that aggregates fields, so it kind of forced a lot of us to use paragraphs more, and then we really liked it. I mean, I'd seen presentations on it. I just didn't really get what it was or why I should care about it. But now I really like it. It's a great approach. Our clients, I feel like, have been really happy with the editing experience. There's still some UX issues to get worked out, but I think it's a pretty solid approach. But yeah, there's a lot of these are in D7. And then one other note on that is that what I've liked about this, I've done this blog series for many years. I like that the list is kind of shrunk, because so much of this in my previous list in D7 and before that, a lot of those modules made their way into core. So entity references, a lot of the field related ones made it into core. Obviously, views made it into core. That was always like the number one thing on the list, like views, download that. So I like that you don't have to download like a million modules just to get up and running in D8. So.
Curious, is Bricks on your radar? Alternative paragraph?
That's another site building tool. I don't know that much about it, honestly.
From what I understand, it's an alternative to paragraphs. Paragraphs you can get lost in the in Inception, right?
Yeah.
Right. And Bricks kind of fixes that problem really well.
Yeah, I'll check that out. I've heard of it. I just really have not dug into that module, Bricks module. Cool. Well, we can go ahead and break, and I'll be here for another few minutes if you want to ask me anything. Thanks for coming.
Do you have a copy of this, a couple of slides?